And welcome back to another episode of the Total Sports Live podcast. It's Jovan Alford, and you already know I'm back again with more best bets for week 2 of the NFL season. If you were with us last week, you already know what happened. And unlike last week when I recorded on Wednesday, this pod is being recorded on a Saturday. So this likely means that we saw some odds movement on various player props with the injury reports out across the league for this second week of action. Nonetheless, here, as always, the goal here is just to focus on the Sunday slate, which has 13 games. 13 games coming up, and then we also have the 2 games on Monday night, which we won't be focusing on. But like I said, focusing on the Sunday slate of games. Are going to highlight last week's plays, which did not go well. That's week 1. You always got to expect the unexpected. So week 1 did not go well, and that will happen from time to time. But as I mentioned in last week's episode, where I said, proceed with caution with week 1, don't play the whole board. Transparency is also key, right? The plays that I give out here are also the plays that I play myself. I'm not just giving out plays and not playing them myself. So took a few L's on that one. So we're going to look back at last week's what happened at last week, and then look forward to Sunday's action here in week 2. But before we get into all that, make sure you are following the podcast on Twitter at Total Sports Live. You're checking out the podcast on all your streaming platforms: Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, also on YouTube. You can check this out here on YouTube. As always, leave your comments on below this video if you're watching on YouTube with your favorite plays for NFL Week 2 best bets, player props as always. And then also don't forget to check out totalsportslive.com. So, like I said, before we jump into what happened, or before we jump into week 2 in general, right? Let's start with what happened with last week's action. The last week's action was not good to us whatsoever. If you follow the plays and kind of saw where everything was trending, it didn't start out good and just didn't finish good. So last week, obviously, we had Pat's wide receiver Demario Douglas over 31.5 receiving yards, minus 114 on FanDuel. He did not do very well. He had 2 receptions for 7 targets on minus 2 yards and a touchdown. The touchdown was great if you had the anytime touchdown for him, but seeing him only come away with 2 receptions for minus 2 yards was not great, given that he had 7 targets. But that was a game that the Patriots just could not get a stop, particularly on defense, as Geno Smith lit them up for over 300-something passing yards as the Raiders came away with that win in week 1 at Foxborough. Second play we had was Seahawks wide receiver Cooper Kupp over 38.5 receiving yards. He, just like Douglas, didn't hit the marker there. 2 receptions, 3 targets for 15 yards versus the 49ers. And then our third and fourth plays from the one game, which was Texans Rams, Jarrett versus Sack. We did not get a couple other players on that Rams defense had some sacks, but we did get the CJ Stroud over 11.5 rushing yards. If you found that 10.5 at some books like Fanatics, I think at 10.5, we cleared this prop easily. 32 rushing yards on 5 carries, which was definitely what I think was going to happen in that game, given the Rams defensive line, also the Rams given the Rams defensive line, but also because of the Texans offensive line, which was a little shaky in that game. I think Stroud was sacked 3 times in that matchup. So we got one there, and then obviously Romeo Doubs anytime touchdown. We did not get that, even though Doubs had a couple of big plays, big catches in that game, and he, I think, even had a target inside the red zone, just couldn't come down with it. So we were on the right track with that, but with anytime touchdowns, they're always a crapshoot, right? You gotta almost predict the game script and just hoping that things break your way, unless it's Saquon Barkley or Jalen Hurts on a tush push. But that was last week's action. 1-4 for week 1, but hopefully with week 2 we'll bounce back. This week only going to give you guys 3 best bets, and then we'll see where it goes from there. So without further ado, let's get into it. Best bet number 1 here, we're going to start with Lamar Jackson over 44.5 rushing yards. You can find this on BetMGM at minus 115. I also like this up to 46.5 rushing yards, which I think you can get at a couple of other books. But if you have MGM, try to hit for this 44.5 after last week's fourth quarter debacle against the Bills, which was just unfathomable. The Ravens are returning home to play the Cleveland Browns, and there's been a lot of talk from the Browns side this week on stopping Derrick Henry, and Jerry Jeudy talking about the Ravens secondary, which I don't know if it's the greatest idea because Jerry Jeudy had a couple of key drops in that game last week, and for the Browns defense trying to slow down Derrick Henry, good luck with that one. Getting that Henry tore up that Bills defense for 169 rushing yards, 18 carries, and a touchdown, minus that fumble he had in the fourth quarter. However, with all that being said, right, the Ravens have one of the better quarterback running back rushing duos in the league with Henry and Lamar Jackson. Lamar did his thing on the ground last week against the Bills, 70 yards on 6 carries and a touchdown. And now he'll be going against a Browns defense that did a pretty good job last week. If you didn't have a chance to see that game against the Bengals, they did a really good job of, slowing down that running game. I think they only had like 46 rushing yards as total as a team. The Bengals did on 2 yards per carry. Chase Brown carried the load. Joe Burrow had a couple of carries, but Joe Burrow isn't a +1 in the running game like Lamar Jackson is. And I also think that the Ravens offensive line is superiorly better than the Cincinnati Bengals offensive line, which they were getting a lot of pressure on that up the middle, on the edge. I think the Browns did a very good job at the point of attack in the trenches, but I don't see the same thing happening here with the Ravens. I think when you have a guy like Lamar Jackson or any mobile quarterback, whether it's Jalen Hurts, whether it's Kyler Murray, just to name guys off the top of my head, Josh Allen, another mobile quarterback, Patrick Mahomes to an extent, you always have to play 11 on 11 football. And this is the same thing that the Browns are going to have to do against Baltimore. As much as you try to slow down Derrick Henry, you always have to watch out for Lamar Jackson in the run game, whether it's on the design quarterback run or whether that's Lamar just pulling it down if nothing's open, which could potentially happen given that the Browns have a pretty solid secondary, especially at that cornerback position with Denzel Ward, leading the way out there, and even their linebackers. I think their linebackers are solid too, with the veteran, Devin Bush, and the rookie Carson Schwarzenegger. But that being said, with them having the focus attention of trying to slow down Derrick Henry, and I think his rushing prop is in the 90s, I think Lamar can hit this on a couple of runs. You look at what he did against his Browns defense last year. Lamar had 46 rushing yards on 8 carries, and then he had in the regular season finale against the same Bengals defense, 63 rushing yards on nine carries. So I'm thinking here, if we can get between 7 to 9 carries in this game, which is very feasible given that the other running backs on this Ravens team didn't get a ton of action in week 1. I think that Lamar can hit this number with a couple of huge runs, as Ravens need to get off the schneid here. They need to get their bad taste out of their mouth after blowing that fourth quarter lead. And why not do it best against a Browns team that, again, like I said, I think they played really good on defense, especially in that second half against the Browns. But the Browns offense is not the Ravens. Is not the Ravens offense. The Ravens offense has, way better wide receivers. Your tight end is on par with David Njoku, but Lamar Henry is better than Flacco, Dylan Sampson, Jerome Ford. So first play here, like I said, I like Lamar Jackson over 44.5 rushing yards. For my second best bet of the week, we're going out to Arizona here. We're going to go with Trey McBride. Trey McBride over 59.5 receiving yards, which you can get over at DraftKings at -120. Or if you can get a 60.5 too, I still like that. I know some books have that at 60.5. I like that number as well for McBride. McBride's coming off a good game last week against New Orleans Saints, where he had 6 receptions, 9 targets for 61 yards. He's going over this number, this 59.5, in 8 out of his last 10 games. That's dating back to last season. McBride didn't have much success against this Panthers team last year when these two teams faced off late in the season. He only had 3 receptions, I think, for 4 targets and 20 yards. But again, if you had a chance to see that Panthers Jaguars game, which wasn't nice for the Panthers at all, the Jaguars completely dominated them on both sides of the ball. We just saw this Panthers defense, give up four receptions for 59 yards to Brenton Strange, the second-year tight end out of Penn State, to Jacksonville. And I think that Trey McBride's a way better tight end than Brenton Strange, even though Strange, I think, will be a solid tight end because of what he brings with his athleticism to the position. Strange is not on the same level as Trey McBride. Now, Yeah, being said, right, Carolina will try to limit Trey McBride's targets. Obviously, their main goal will be trying to make this Arizona team, excuse me, one dimensional, right? Can we just not get beat by Trey McBride or Marvin Harrison Jr., who I thought looked well, who I thought played well in the game last week against New Orleans Saints. However, with this prop, I'm leaning and taking the chances on that McBride can get open and can do something against these Carolina linebackers, against Trevin Wallace, the second-year linebacker out of Kentucky, and Christian Roseboom. Wallace gave up 27 receiving yards last week against the Jags, and then Roseboom gave up 45 yards receiving yards in last week's loss to Jacksonville. And I think McBride can easily hit this again. He's their number one pass option outside of Marvin Harrison. It's those two guys, and then you have James Conner running the ball. And he can also factor in a little bit in the passing game, but those two guys are kind of the catalyst of this Arizona Cardinals passing game. So for me, I'm taking McBride. I'm not overthinking this. I think this week is predominantly don't overthink some of these plays, and I'm not going to overthink with this one. I'm taking McBride over 59.5 receiving yards for our second best bet. And then last but not least here on the pod here, we're going out to the Still City here. DK Metcalf, anytime touchdown, plus 160 on FanDuel. The veteran wide receiver, as we know, we facing his former team, the Seattle Seahawks, in the Steelers home opener. The Steelers had a thrilling week one win over the New York Jets, where they scored 34 points in Aaron Rodgers threw not one, not two, not three, but 4 touchdowns. Yeah, Aaron Rodgers completely turned back the clock on Aaron Glenn's team, dropping 4 touchdowns. But surprisingly, none of those touchdowns went to DK Metcalf. Instead, they went to guys like Calvin Austin III, who a lot of people are high on in fantasy right now after week one. And I don't blame you, given what the Steelers wide receiver situation looks like after him in Metcalf. It's really not desirable if you want to put stock in guys like Scotty Miller and Ben Skoranek. I think it's a good best bet to probably put your hedge in your future on, in fantasy on a guy like Calvin Austin third. We also saw Jalen Warren get in the end zone. Like I said, Ben Skoranek, former Ram depth wide receiver here, get in the end zone. We also saw Jonnu Smith, the second tight end for the Steelers, also find his way into the end zone. And I think Metcalf, even though he didn't get as many, he didn't find the end zone in this game. I think, given that he led the team in targets, he was tied in receptions with 4, with Calvin Austin, and receiving yards, he led the team at 83 yards. I gotta think they're going to find a way to get him the ball again, but also try to way to get him to find a way into the end zone. I think if you're the Steelers, with Seattle not having Devon Witherspoon the second year cornerback, he's right now listed doubtful with a knee, but he's missed the last 2 days of practice with the DNP. If I'm the Steelers, look to attack their secondary. We all know that Reek Woolen will likely draw the assignment of defending DK, which that's just going to be fun to watch because Reek Woolen is one of the better cornerbacks in the league that a lot of people do not talk about. The guy's been pretty good going back to his rookie year coming out of UTSA. However, if Metcalf and the Steelers see that he's matched up against a guy like Josh Jobe, who did have an interception, so we got to give the former Eagles some credit there, did have an interception in last week's game, or if it's Shaquille Griffin, who was just called up from the practice squad. I gotta give the advantage here to DK Metcalf against his former team. I think this is going to be another interesting, fun game. I think if you're the Steelers, this is a very winnable game, and I think if you can get DK Metcalf the ball, get him in rhythm, get him going early, I think that will continue to open up things for this passing game. Obviously, you don't want Calvin Austin. Calvin Austin will be able to get his, especially with the Seahawks, probably thinking, we got to keep Metcalf out the end zone. We got to limit the explosive plays to him. That could open things for Calvin Austin. And we still don't know what's happening with the Steelers running game. Obviously, Jalen Warren looks like he is the RB1 per se, but we also saw a lot of Kenny Gainwell too, getting some third down action as well on the Steeler team. But all that being said, I do like DK Metcalf here on an anytime touchdown plus 160 at FanDuel, and that's pretty much gonna wrap it up here. A nice quick pod for you guys, before you can get your plays in, excuse me, for Sunday's action here. If you missed it, we're going to recap it one more time here for you all. Lamar Jackson over 44.5 rushing yards. Trey McBride over 59.5 receiving yards again, or I like it at over 60.5. And then last, Steelers wide receiver DK Metcalf, anytime touchdown, plus 160. Those are my 3 plays for this week. Again, if you have any plays that you like this week, make sure you leave it in the comments below on YouTube, or make sure you hit me up on Blue Sky with those as well. I think my Blue Sky is like at jovan10.bsky.com or something along those lines. Hit me up there if you have any plays that you like for this week. And again, as always, make sure you're following the podcast on all the streaming platforms here, whether that's Google, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube as well. Make sure you continue to, like, subscribe, send the video to other people that you might know who might be getting into some bets this weekend, or the shorts as we're uploading shorts as well from these podcasts. So you make sure that you can get those plays in quick snippets and you can go in and out. And again, as always, make sure you are checking out totalsportslive.com. But that's going to wrap up this one here for week 2. Let's hope for a better week 2. We can't do any worse than 1-4. Well, we could if you 0-3, but as long as we come back with a win here in week 2, and I think we have 3 strong plays, I think we'll be good. So this is Jovan. Everyone have a good one, and we will talk to you all next week.